Go. How well do you know your favorite blogger? I'm David Gewirtz. Joining me is Jason Perlow of ZDNet's Tech Broiler. Welcome to our first episode of Better Know a Blogger. Hiya, Jason. How you doing?
What's up, David?
Well, this is actually our second take in an attempt to launch this thing. Getting to know these systems is pretty unique and new. So thank you for joining me. We're starting off our first version of Better Know a Blogger. The idea here is to really reach out and turn off the American flag background. There we go.
I like the patriotic flag band, though. I mean,
You like it?
yeah, it feels really cool and jingoistic today, on a Friday.
Well, we'll put it back on. For those of you who are thinking you're listening to DIY-IT and not ZDNet government, have an American flag. Go for it. There you go. That's the technology at work. So as you guys can tell, this is not going to be your normal interview.
No, not at all.
Not at all. Jason and I have known each other forever. But my goal here is to let our readers know the individual bloggers at ZDNet, and to a bigger extent for us to get to know what blogging is like from successful bloggers. Each blogger has his or her own technique for being successful in this business. And so what we want to do is really get a feel for exactly what's involved in the blogging world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to Jason. I'm going to ask you the first question. I actually have a pile of questions here, but feel free to jump in on anything else. So let's start with
man.
Yeah, there you go. Let's start with the basics. Tell us about your background and what got you to where you are now.
Sure. So I've been working in the technology industry since the late 1980s, pretty much when I got out of school. And I've always been a technology, I guess you could say, an enthusiast of some kind. I've been using PCs since I was probably 13 years old, of all different flavors. Apple IIs, Atari 800s, TRS 80s, PETs, Commodores, all that kind of stuff. And pretty much started very early in the IBM PC generation. Started learning Unix during my summer jobs in high school, and eventually I ended up on Wall Street doing a lot of trading floor technology type of infrastructure design and implementation for all these companies, some of them that don't exist anymore, Bear Stearns and Lehman and all those places.
Great.
And a whole bunch of the stuff that I worked on during the 2000s crashed and burned in a very large collapse of two very well-known towers that I used to work at quite a bit. So fortunately I was not there that day, but it still sticks in my mind.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty crazy. That must have been something to. I mean, I was there very shortly before, but I didn't work there, and it was, to this day I remember seeing. There's a bigger version of me in the background. Let's get rid of the bigger version of me. There we go. I still remember vividly driving past Princeton Junction. A lot of people in Princeton Junction used to commute to the towers.
Yeah.
And for months after that, there were cars there that had just never moved. That was the train
Nope.
station, and that was something. Okay, anyway, let's not be maudlin. Let's go back to the Jason Perlow machine. So do you work primarily from office or home? What's your typical workday like? I know you travel a tremendous amount.
Yeah, I work for a very large technology integrator, and I work, I would say, about 60 or 70% away from home, and the remainder of that time from my home office. So yeah, I do travel quite a bit. I do use a lot of mobile technology.
So what's your typical workday like?
Well, if I'm home, which I'm lucky enough to be at this week, or rather today, because I just got back off of a plane off of Chicago late last night. And typically I'll wake up at around, 8 o'clock in the morning. I'll run down to my Nespresso coffee machine, hit the button, take my first shot and walk down right to my basement office, which you see right here behind me. There's quite a bit of cables and old stacks of tech and things and parts and things that I use to sort of construct my home laboratory for testing software and hardware and all kinds of networking junk and whatnot.
So do you do your blogging mostly first thing in the morning? Do you write at night? Is it whenever something enrages you? How do you
Um,
decide when to do that stuff?
Sometimes when things just enrage me, but I have sort of this weird thought process. And I'm one of these ADD type individuals where there's always thoughts spinning in my head at all times. In fact, my wife sometimes looks at me when we're in the car and, we're on a drive, and I let my wife drive a lot when I'm at home. It's because I do so much driving when I'm away. And she'll look at me and say, I see your lips moving and you look like you're talking to yourself. And I'm like, no, I'm having an internal conversation thinking about what I'm going to write about. And often it takes me several days to compose my thoughts and think about what I do want to write about. I'm usually not the first to come to. I'm not a newsy type of blogger. We have a lot of fine folks on the ZDNet network that approach articles from more of an instant news reporting sort of perspective, such as Larry Dignan, Mary Jo Foley, Zach Whitaker. As soon as those tech news hits, they're right on it. I usually wait a couple days before I weigh in on a subject because I really want to see all the perspectives that are out in the industry, and I want to synthesize my own perspective on the information, which is typically very different from the point of view that you'll typically see from 90% of the articles out there. Just because I'm doing I call it kind of pattern analysis, but it's really more of straightforward, I guess, research and analysis, and I would call it projection of industry trends.
Yeah, you and I are very similar in that regard. I do mostly perspective stuff. I tend not to do any kind of breaking news. So, for example, yesterday there was some breaking news out of the White House, but it took me a couple of hours to a day to think through what it meant before I went off and wrote something about it and made something from that, based on thinking about what it meant to me. And I know that sometimes it's a real interesting thing. Do we get the scoop, or do we, write about what we think is the result of our experience and our expertise and our opinions and all that sort of thing? I'll probably come back to that in a little bit. Let me ask you another question, though. This is kind of personal, so feel free to not answer it. But what percentage of your income comes from blogging, and what percentage from other activities? And I know about
Um,
this, your big employer, but what?
yeah, I would say it's significant actually. In recent years, I'd say it's as much as 30% of my income.
That tracks pretty much with me. I do about the same. It's interesting when you look at blogging in terms of there's a lot of people who don't do this sort of professionally,
Right.
but those of us at ZDNet really work it, and I think you see the result of it both in terms of our output and in terms of to some degree our income, which is kind of
Well,
cool.
not just that, I would say the quality of the output too, because most technology writing in our industry right now is not actually being performed by working technologists. And you can see that in the quality of the writing. If you look at some of the new media type publication, and I'm not going to name names, but you can tell the difference between someone who is a working technologist and a non-working technologist, or someone who has never worked in technology,
Yeah,
writing the
absolutely.
copy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So do you when you're at home? Let me find my actual point on this thing here. Okay. When you're at home, do you distinguish between work time and home time? Do you work specific hours? You just work whenever? Are you a 5 day a weeker or 7 day a weeker?
Well, when I'm home, I am my primary function is to support my customers for my employer. So typically I'll write early in the morning or late at night or in the weekends. So I do a lot of my hardest heavy duty writing in the evening. I would say probably past 6 p.m. to as late as 2 o'clock in the morning. And also, Saturday mornings is a big day for me, as is Sunday.
So how do you distinguish between and this is not only for your employer but for blogging,
Right.
between when you're at home, between the sort of home time and productive time? I know many of us who work from home have a bit of a challenge, not only for ourselves, but, for our families and spouses in terms of,
Sure.
okay, now it's I'm working David, and now it's I'm husband David. How does that fit
Well,
for you?
it's a good thing that my office setup is completely isolated from the rest of the house. It's kind of funny. I mean, right now in the middle of selling my house, it's on the market, and all my computer junk and everything is shoved into my office. The rest of the house, I don't let any of that stuff invade any of our personal space. I mean, I'll walk around, maybe with an iPad or a tablet or something. I'll hang out with it, in the bedroom while we're watching TV or something. But for the most part, work time is dedicated to my office. I try to get out. I mean, I try to take breaks, for about an hour at a time, just because I just can't keep burning the oil, nonstop for several hours at a time without taking a 1 or 2 hour break. So I have a pretty flexible work schedule. Unfortunately, my spouse is very supportive of what I do and my career, or rather, my two careers. One is being a technologist and systems integrator, and the other being a writer. So.
I think we're both very, very fortunate in how we've managed to marry.
Yeah, both of us have wives that are way too good for us. Let's
I
put it that way.
agree, totally, absolutely, totally. So, I guess I'm going to ask you in a twofold, since you're in transition. Not only what is your workspace like now, but what would be the ideal workspace for you?
Well, it's interesting because we were looking at houses in Florida, because I really don't know what I didn't really know what Florida houses looked like, because you can't really compare them to a Northeast in New York or New Jersey house. They're laid out typically differently. Of
We
course,
are basement free,
yeah,
sadly.
and I never want to see another basement for the rest of my life, if possible. But we looked at, because I didn't really know what I wanted in a house, but I knew that I needed enough space for my office, and ideally, I would like to have a small room that I can ventilate and use as a server room to keep the servers out of my office. Because right now, I don't know if you can look behind me. I don't know if I should try to aim the camera or not, but there are several racks of servers sitting right behind me in that IKEA, bread baker's, stand right there. I got two of them there.
Well, if you want to try for it, go for it. And if worst comes
Yeah,
to
sure. I'll
worst,
try
we'll.
doing it. And you can see as I pan a little bit, I've got all kinds of computer junk behind me, right? So those are all, I can't run them all simultaneously because they'd heat up the room too much and they draw a lot of power. Because this is a 1960s built house, and I don't want to blow out the circuits and start flipping and having to start flipping breakers. So I can't run all my equipment at once. I'd like to be able to run a couple of things at once, maybe consolidate and virtualize as much as possible, but it's kind of hard to do. Right now, I have a little Mac Mini that I use as my main writing and browsing and photo editing machine, and I have a completely separate work desktop, which is a Linux box that runs VMware, which has got all different versions of Windows and Linux operating systems and Unixes on it. Plus, I got the high power servers if I really need to do anything serious. But ideally, I would like to put those high power servers in another room and make them quiet so I don't have to hear them. Because when you turn on one of those big data center style servers, it sounds like a jet engine going off. And
Yeah,
it gives
definitely.
you a headache, and I can't keep them on for more than an hour or so before losing my mind. So I'd like to be able to turn them on and not have to hear them. And I'd also like to have a bit more of a lighted, more of a lighted, ventilated space than what I'm in now. Right now we have the lights turned off for the recording purposes, but it's more of a fluorescent type of a big halogen which lights the room. I'd like to have more natural light coming in here because it's just more healthy. I probably would like to, reduce the amount of equipment I have as far as the desktops. I might want to give this Mac Mini to my wife and probably go for, if a Mac Pro comes out, I like to get one of those and maybe put two monitors on it so I don't have to keep going back and forth between two different workstation consoles and keyboards and mice. Sometimes it feels like I'm trying to be an air traffic controller in here with all the equipment that I've got, and it just, as I get older, my ADD starts acting up on me, and I have mental breakdowns in the middle of the day sometimes. So yeah, that about sums it up.
So have you ever tried using what's it, Synchrony or Synchronicity?
Yeah, Synergy. I used
Synergy.
it for a while. It was okay, but like you lose connectivity and you have to reestablish it,
Yeah.
and the cut and paste wasn't perfect. It was, so I kind of gave up on that after a
Yeah, that
while.
was actually my experience with it as well. I don't know if you remember, you were up in the apartment when I was in New Jersey, right, where we had the server closet. Do you remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about servers. Our readers don't know this, but at one point, the publishing company that I work for, we put all of our servers inside this small closet inside of my apartment, and I mean this was before the network was as active. The internet was the internet to some degree, and so we ran a T1 line through my bathroom. I had to convince. It was either Verizon or New Jersey Bell or whoever it was at the time to run a T1 into a private home, which they'd never done before.
Wow.
And then we wound up tapping into live electrical circuits because the apartment complex was certainly not happy with this idea. And we put ventilation into basically a linen closet and put 10 or 15 honking servers into that thing. So out the vent was like 200-degree temperatures coming
Wow.
out of that vent.
That couldn't have been good for those servers.
No, it was not. We had one. One of them exploded, and I actually had pictures of the drive inside turned to dust. But I was always concerned that I'd get raided because I had this closet that was 200
Right.
degrees, and I was pulling all this power. So
Yeah, right. Like maybe you're like a Russian spy trying to like decrypt, local law enforcement or government communications or something.
our grow room.
Right.
Um,
The grow room, exactly. That's what the therm. That's all the thermal they'd be looking at. They'd be looking for something else. Yeah.
yeah, what is going on in that place? So I've always wondered, the subsequent tenants who came in wondering what is in here. So okay, I'm going to turn this flag off because it's making me crazy. There we go. So let's go on to sort of specific on a few things. What's your main desktop browser? How do you like it, and are you considering moving to something else?
I use Chrome Stable now, all across the board, pretty
Really?
much. Hmm.
I found that Chrome crashes a lot.
Well, you know what? I was using the Chrome developer channel, and that was blowing things up left and right on the Mac. But then I moved. There was a while where if you wanted like the bookmark synchronization and stuff, you needed the beta versions. And as of like I guess a couple months ago, they when they stabilized on Chrome 17 or 16, a lot of those features got folded into the stable version. So I started using stable version, and that pretty much stopped a lot of my crashiness
It's pretty
for the
cool.
most part.
So how do you deal with all the social networking chores that we have on a daily basis? Do you hand post to the various services? Do you use a tool? What do you do about Google Plus? How do you care
Oh
about it?
gosh, I wish I had a way of handling them all these status updates and posts with one good desktop tool. I don't want to use a browser tool because I don't know. I like native applications for the most part, but Twitter I use. I was playing around with a couple different Twitter clients. First, I used TweetDeck, which ran on Adobe Air, and that ran across both Linux and Mac and Windows platforms. So I was used to it. I liked it, but it was eating up so many resources and memory, and it was so crashy that eventually I ditched it. So I started using the TweetDeck in the Chrome version on the Chrome native client. That chewed up a lot of CPU horsepower, so I didn't like that one either after a while. And then I got to Twitterific on Mac, which is pretty good, although it was more resource intensive. So now I'm using Echo Phone on the Mac, and on my tablets I'm using what is it, Plume on Android. And on the iPad, I think I was using. I just got rid of my iPad a couple weeks ago because I sent it in to sell it so I could buy the iPad 3 so I maximize my sales value out of it. So currently I don't have an iOS device, but when I was using Osphora, which was pretty good.
So,
And that's the short of it. Yeah,
yeah. Just before we go on, let's itemize the tablets you have, because
I have all of them.
one night I was having an email conversation with you, and each email message came from a different tablet.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's funny. Over the last couple of years, Tech Broiler started off as sort of an enterprise perspective blog. It was started I originally got my start at ZDNet because Mary Jo Foley, who I've known for many, many years. I started off at the same publication Actually, she brought me on to a publication called Smart Reseller that was owned by Ziff Davis Publishing many moons ago. And Mary Jo used to quote me as a source and stuff on Windows and various other technologies, OS2 especially when I was heavily into that. And she brought me on Smart Reseller, and that's where I met Mary Jo and Stephen Von Nichols. And so I wrote about a lot of technologies from the integrator reseller perspective. And how did we start this? What was the question again? Sorry.
How many tablets are you running at once?
Okay. Wait. How many tablets? So yeah. So anyway, Tech Broiler was originally an enterprise blog, all right? Because I was brought in for my enterprise experience, integrator experience. But over time, I've been focusing heavily on mobile technologies from a more of a 10,000-foot level. Not quite, James Kendrick and our other really good blogger Matt Miller, who focus on cell phones and tablets pretty much exclusively from the product oriented level. I mean, they look at every single product that comes down the line. Could get much more detail than I do, but I have at least one of every platform. So I had a iPad. I'm waiting to get the next one in another 2 weeks. The iPad 3 or whatever they end up calling it. I have a couple of different Androids. I have a Kindle Fire. I have a Motorola Zoom. I have the BlackBerry Playbook, and I have an HP Touchpad currently. That pretty much covers all the major flavors.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So actually, where I was starting this before we started talking about tablets is trying to understand. You mentioned the social networking tools you use, but how do you integrate it into your day-to-day life? You're a pretty active Twitterer. Do you define a time of day that you work on it, or do you just, as you're browsing, decide to pass things along, or have you made it a conscious decision to put time into it? And basically, the bigger version of this question is, essentially, how important do you think social networking is to your life, both as a blogger and as an individual technologist?
Well, if I had to eliminate all my social networking services except for one, I would only do Twitter.
Really?
Yeah. That's the one that I only really care about because that's where I'm getting most of my news from. Facebook is strictly imports my Twitter feed. I really don't drop statuses directly into Facebook. I'll check Facebook if my wife says somebody posted something, posted something on Facebook, or you got an invitation. I'm pretty much I set up my author journalist page, and that just basically sucks everything in from the Twitter feed. I do like Google Plus a lot. I like the fact that you can compartmentalize groups of people. So, for example, I have all the ZDNet people in one group. I have a larger group called Computer Industry. I have another group called Food Industry because I also blog about food. Sometimes I used to blog about food a lot more, but really lately I've been focusing more about the technology. And then I have sort of like an everyone else dump bucket, which I don't really follow. It's more of a public. People that follow me, I follow them back, but I don't really check their stuff that often. So it's good that I can follow on Google Plus specific, like if I missed people on my Twitter feed. I mean, I follow a couple. I think I follow just a bit over 1,000 people on my Twitter feed, and I leave that client running in my Mac in the background. So if I see something blaze across, I'll repost it, retweet it. I'll take a look at it. I'll mark it down for something I need to look at later if it's an article or something. But the G Plus is good to go there if I can look at, for example, my ZDNet feed, and if people have reposted stuff in there, I can see what my colleagues have written over the last couple of days, for example. So that's good for kind of as like a memory refresher. I think as a social networking service overall, I definitely prefer G Plus to Facebook.
Interesting. So how, if you were to give advice to other bloggers, now you and I have a pretty decent following. We're really lucky as bloggers in the sense
Yeah.
that, we make a decent income from it. We have a pretty decent following. We have a high profile site. But for others who may be interested in doing this, how important do you think this whole social networking thing is? And do you have any specific recommendations for them in terms of both how to prioritize whether it's important to pay attention to versus something else in terms of their career? And B, what do you think?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, my own follower count is actually rather low on Twitter compared to some of the other technology writers out there. I broke 5,000 about maybe two months ago. But the people who follow me are a very core group of influential people. So if you look at like, I mean, so there are other people out there that write that have the same level of, I would call it blog exposure as we do, that probably have three, four, five times the amount of followers. I don't know if Twitter really translates into a lot of traffic necessarily. I think it's a good mechanism for getting other people in your industry to see what they're writing about, especially if they're posting their blog articles to their Twitter feed, which I suggest you do, but I don't think you should do that exclusively. I think you do need to add value. I've found that I like to chase and retweet Twitter stuff that is of general interest to my readers. So things about mobile technology, tablets, smartphones, enterprise virtualization technology, and even futurism type things, because I consider myself somewhat of a futurist in the style of which I write my articles. Those are the types of things that I like to retweet as well. Of course, the food stuff, which everybody kind of depends on me for to a certain extent. So
Yeah.
so I'm kind of a mixed blogger in a sense.
Yeah, people don't really know that Jason is just about the only man who's ever made me cry, and that's whenever he's posted some of these amazing pictures of burgers on your food site. Which, by the way, why don't we give a plug for the food site?
Yeah, then that's offthebroiler.com, and I will. It's slowed down the last couple of months, but I should have some really cool posts up in the next week or so of some more mouth-watering restaurant dishes.
There was one day there was this steak thing that almost brought me to tears, and then after that, like a couple weeks later, there were some of these burgers that
Yeah, the summertime is when it gets really intense because that's when I fire up the grill and start doing some really serious burgers and steaks and barbecue and stuff like
to
that.
this day those burgers still appear in my dreams. And Jason is also to be credited for recommending my grill, so he's one of my favorite people. Okay, so speaking of favorite people, how do you deal with Facebook? Do you use it for close friends only? I mean, you mentioned your wife follows it, but
Well, I have
a fan
a
page,
sordid
or?
history with Facebook. When I first got started, I'm guessing I started using it maybe in 2006 or 2007. I accepted every single friend request that I got. So I ended up at some point with, and I know I documented this in a ZDNet article a while ago, maybe 2 years ago. Um, I must have had over 2,000 friends, something to that extent, and it became unmanageable. So what I started to, and I was having all sorts of security issues with it, and I wasn't happy with the way the company was handling its privacy policy and various other things at the time. I mean, they've gotten better, but they're still not great. So I started literally cutting down my friends, defriending people, just down to people that I either met in person or I've corresponded with for any period of time, or if I knew them as an industry person. So that got me down to about 300 and change friends, which I think is still probably too big. Ideally, I'd probably like to get it down to 100 and just be people that I know and correspond with. It's just because the amount of time that you have to devote to Facebook to see every single status message and thing that comes across when you're following or friending that many people, it's just a huge burden. And people get upset if you don't reply to them or it's literally I almost think Facebook is almost like a Tamagotchi, those little toys that you used to have years ago. If you don't feed it, it dies. So that's kind of where I am with Facebook right now. I know that I have to have my author page so that people can go there and take a look at it, and see my articles and things. But as an interaction mechanism, I'm not that crazy about it.
Do you fiddle with your author page much, or do you just kind of let it sit there?
I play with I've started playing with some of the plugins and things, but I just it's not a major traffic driver for me. I mean, I have it there because I have it there. It's not really something that I babysit too much.
So let's switch on to another part of management as a blogger. What do you use to manage contacts? Do you use a separate CRM? How do you categorize or structure them for daily use? Do you use any tools like eGrabber to automatically enter them, or do you just sort of leave them in your email?
I use, well, of course, LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I think it's a great tool. I also use that thing that was it Mozilla bought this week, or was it what do we call it? It's that thing on the side when you're using Gmail that shows you like all everyone's social media contact information. What's it called?
Zobme?
No. I can open it up in a second and show you exactly. Oh, Rapportive.
Mm.
Rapportive, yeah. I think somebody bought them this week.
That's because you're a Gmail user, so you're using Gmail contacts.
Yeah, Gmail is I'm a big Google application junkie, which is the reason why I use an Android phone as opposed to an iPhone.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I use Exchange, so mostly because Google at one point screwed up my accounts and has been unwilling to ever fix them. So such is life, right? So what do you do about researching research information and resources like articles and web pages that you might reference? Do you save your links as bookmarks? Do you use a tool like Evernote or Zotero, or do you just kind of wing it?
I wing it.
You wing it?
Yeah.
Working mostly off of memory?
Yep.
Okay. So after all this, you've been blogging, well, I mean, you've been writing forever as far as I can recall, and I have too. What sort of advice would you give to somebody who wants to start doing this, especially somebody who wants to start doing this and making money out of it, or somebody who wants to start doing this and using it for influence? Speak. Give us your advice.
Well, I don't want to be depressive, but I feel like I've entered this industry on its decline.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I used to love, writing for print publications and reading the quality material that came out of things like Byte and eWeek or PC Magazine. The classic hardcore writers like Jim Seymour, even Dvorak in his prime. Those guys who wrote really solid, lengthy technical articles about computing. And today it's so much more. Look, quite frankly, to make money in this business, it's a page view driven model where we're not paid by the word anymore or by the feature. While we don't have the same constraints of ad to copy ratio like we used to, where we used to have to cut articles down because the ads would get in the way. It's all about retaining attention of the reader on your blog article. So if I write, do I spend the time writing a 1,500 word piece, or should I write a really engaging 600 word piece that's going to grab eyeballs and get people clicking a million times on something? And my gut instinct is to put the quality out there first. But I know a lot of writers, if they really want to make a lot of money, that's not necessarily the case. So it's kind of like we're living in the what was that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, The Running Man. We're in the Running Man universe where everything is attention grabbing, right? And you have to put in a little bit of I would say controversy in our writing in order to generate interest, especially with headline optimization and that sort of thing to grab eyeballs. When you look at your actual metrics and see how long people sat on those pages relative to how many pages you have, that after the first page of text, you're going to lose 40% of your audience. So it's a completely different approach to writing than what I grew up appreciating.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that sometimes, for example, that in articles where I know I'll get a lot more traffic if I split it into pages, if I really want to make sure that everybody gets the concept, I don't split it into pages. So I essentially take a financial hit to make sure that the reader gets the message. And it's interesting because as a writer, I shouldn't be thinking about, okay, well, will I make more or less out of this article based on how I present it to the reader? But you kind of have to balance that. And a number of times I've known that, essentially my income from this process has been less because it was more important to make sure the readers got the full bite-sized component of it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's sort of like a junk food versus eating your vegetables concept. I try to interject as much vegetables into my junk food as possible, so to speak. But it is. I mean, if you look at where I started with Tech Broiler in 2008, which was much more enterprise technology, nitty gritty sort of stuff, and now I'm really looking at more mass technology type of stuff from a 10,000 foot level. I've also brought writers onto the network that have specialties in certain things like networking and virtualization. I just didn't have time to chase all these things. I have the luxury of being a general technology writer rather than a specialist, so I can chase the topics that generally interest me, and that I think have more mass appeal. So I'm very lucky in that sense. But a lot of people tend to get boxed in their areas of specialization and can't get out of their comfort zone,
Yeah.
so to speak.
So let's look at you mentioned earlier you're something of a futurist. So let's do that. Why don't you take me from, what are we, 2012? Why
Yep.
don't you take me to 2020? What is the world like? What is the internet like? What is technology? Walk me through and walk our readers through, viewers, readers, what the world will be in 2020.
The year 2020. Well, we can definitely see. Obviously, if we extrapolate, Moore's law, we're going to be seeing petascale computing is going to be commonplace, at least in enterprises. So, and when that happens, you're going to have a lot of centralization of computing and more cloud-based, thin client technology is going to be happening on the consumer and on the enterprise user side. I think that the emergence of things like web standards, you're going to have a lot more web-based apps. At the same time, you're going to be looking at a lot of moving away from the traditional. I mean, look, let's take a look at Intel for starters. It's been around for 30 years at this point. So I think that given the fact that we want to work into more green technologies, green in terms of less power consumptive but efficient computing technologies, we're going to be seeing more ARM adoption, maybe even PowerPC, some other chip technologies that will be introduced that'll be more efficient, where we can get rid of a lot of that legacy code. Because if you take a look at Windows, I mean, I saw your debate with Stephen J. Von Nichols a couple days ago. Microsoft is really throwing out Win32 into the garbage over a period of time. Not that Windows 8 won't be able to run traditional Win32 based apps, but if we look at 2020, by then, legacy technology will be gone. I mean, for the most part, a lot of it will be sold, I believe, as software as a service, rather than having to go to an app store type of experience using coding methodologies that are different than what we've been using for the last 20
So let
years.
me interrupt you for a second on this. Do you think that once Windows moves to ARM, that is, and then becomes another app store, that we're essentially going to lose our freedom to use computers the way we've used them in the past, with all the flexibility we have, the ability to
I
configure our
think that
machines, all
we
that
need
stuff?
to. Yeah, I think though that's kind of a more of a Orwellian type of thought process, though, because for the most part, I think that most users don't really need, quote unquote, the freedoms and these expensive $3,000 workstations that we're using to do content creation. There will always be a need for content creation professionals, and they will need more powerful computers. So I think that'll be a limited market, but that market will exist. It'll have to exist at least until, from a an architecture perspective, those chipsets can handle those more powerful applications, or people are getting gigabit Ethernet. Gigabit fiber to the house or to the office, where you can literally do cloud-based content creation of the type that they're using now. But I think that we want to get away from computing as an IT burden, rather than and empower the user by giving them applications without having to worry about them maintaining their systems. I mean, if I gave my mother-in-law a Chromebook, she loves the thing. I've never gotten a complaint about breaking applications or anything since she got one of those. I think that once these type of devices, iPads, embedded operating systems become more the norm, and more of our applications are functioning on redundant infrastructure and large multi-tenant cloud providers in both the enterprise and in public space, I think we're going to be a lot better off. Because I mean, I don't have to. I mean, can you imagine a future where you don't have to worry about backing up your data if your cloud provider's automatically taking snapshots on their SAN for you, every hour, every minute, or wherever it is? I mean, we should not have to worry about these types of things anymore.
That future terrifies me because, I've been in this business for a long time, and every time I've relied solely on a provider, something's gone wrong. I mean, one of the things that you sometimes think about is the size of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
And very often if a provider does something and it's not right, you almost have no recourse. And so I've always been very much a proponent of making sure I have my own backups, my own approach, my own control, because every time I've relied solely on a provider, especially one of the big ones, I've gotten bitten in the butt for it.
I think in the next 10 years, we're really going to be looking at a hybridized approach where you're going to have a certain amount of local data, but you're also going to have a certain large set of data in the cloud. And those clouds that are going to be produced will be balls to the wall tested for all the nines at the enterprise level before the customer ever gets any kind of productized implementation that gets rolled out to Joe Sixpack, right? So the IBMs and the HPs of the world and the Microsofts and the Apples, they're all going to be spending tremendous amounts of money on making this infrastructure resilient before your average customer sees it.
Well, if you've got a resilient infrastructure, then the interesting question becomes then what about a resilient or robust support environment? If you've got a really, really, 5.9 sort of fully working or what is it, 9.9, 7.9, something like that, system, but you have to talk to a guy in India who barely speaks English and reads off a script, doesn't that defeat the purpose of that really strong infrastructure?
Well, these are all really big questions, right? So,
that's why I'm asking you.
I don't have the answer to all these things. I try to see 5, 10, 15 years in the future, and then as we go out farther, certain things become easier to answer, and some things become a lot more difficult, right? So it's easy to extrapolate things like miniaturization, moving off of systems architectures into new ones. The evolution of display graphics and CPU and storage and all that stuff. But when you look into the human factors that come into technology, I mean, like things like like Connect interfaces. Are we going to be waving our hands in front of the computer and doing what you call it, the Minority Report interfaces? Is voice recognition finally going to become real versus sort of this toy thing that's in Siri right now? I don't know the answer to that. I can't tell you. But it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few years.
Yeah, I don't think any of us really know. Let me switch gears entirely and let's get personal for a second.
Sure.
What's your family like? I know you're married. Kids, pets. What's
no kids. Like? I have two very small dogs.
Really?
Yeah.
So do you think your dogs are cuter than Stephen Von Nickel's dog? Because I did that presentation with him.
I don't know cuter. I'll say Twiggy is a very cute little dog. I have two poodles. One's about 14 pounds. The other one's about 22. The 14-pound dog is really, really cute, but has a nasty streak because she's got food aggression issues. So I know that when we take her to the dog park, she likes to chase after Yorkies because she thinks they're rats and wants to eat them. So I don't know how she deal with the Shih Tzu, to be honest with you.
Well, I got to tell you, I got completely upstaged by Twiggy. I'm thinking about putting it in my contract that I don't do this with two dogs.
Right.
Because,
yeah.
Man, I was winning until the dog showed up, and then boom,
yeah.
there was no contest.
No.
How about the third rail of this stuff, religion and politics? Share whatever you feel comfortable about.
Yeah, I was raised in New York in a Jewish family, but although not. One side was more observant than the other. My father's side was quote unquote more observant. They bought the doors to the local temple in Queens, where my father grew up, and my mother's side was definitely, uh, at least my mother's father, was a religious, meaning that they my grandmother cooked on the high holiday. At least she tried to cook on the high holidays without burning the house down, once or twice. But they were, I would say, very, very reform, or almost non-practicing Jews, and and that kind of reflected in the way I grew up. Um, it's hard for me as a technologist and somebody who embraces science, um, to have religious leanings. I would like to think that there's a more powerful being out there that's looking at us and is, helping us. But it's just seeing what happens to the world. It doesn't resonate with me. Um, I do believe there are probably other intelligence out there. I don't know if we're ever going to see them or get to them, just to the vast distances of the universe. But to think that we're alone in this universe is a bit, I think, arrogant, especially if you start doing the mathematics. But politics, I don't think I would, if you were to describe my political leanings, I'm what they would call a right centrist libertarian. So I have extremely liberal social leanings. I think gay people should be able to adopt children and get married and pay taxes like the rest of us, married schlubs. More power to them. I think that women should have equal rights to men as far as employment and ability, and salaries and all those things. So all the things that would drive Republicans crazy from a social perspective, I have all of those views. I believe in the legalization of certain types of drugs that are currently Schedule 3 or Schedule 2 type drugs. I do from a financial perspective, however, I'm extremely conservative. I'm also extremely conservative from a defense perspective. I believe that this country ultimately has to do when it's in its own interest, militarily, to protect our way of life. And I believe over the last 10 years we have, weakened ourselves in that respect.
Yeah, I'm a very strong believer in a strong defense as well, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of this you and I agree on as well. What do you do for fun? What hobbies, interests? What's your enjoyment side of things?
Because I'm so busy, let's see, I don't like reality television. I get most of my news from the computer. So I don't really like to watch the news on TV. I like to watch really stupid comedies and science fiction shows and escapist type of stuff. I like to read escapist stuff. I like a History Channel, Discovery, PBS, history, that kind of stuff. Military type of programming. And of course, I love to cook. And writing, I think, really is a therapeutic form of diversion for me. It's kind of like what keeps me sane from my main job in a lot of respects. My identity, I believe, is more as of a technology writer, blogger than a working technologist, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely, certainly. So this question comes from, I saw it somewhere. Okay, it was a great question, and I can't remember where I saw it from, so I can't give the location credit. But it's going to be my primary ending question, and then I'll open it up to you if you want to have anything else
Sure.
to say. So the question is, what would the 10-year-old you think of the you here today?
It's very interesting. What was the 10-year-old me thinking? Well, when I was 10 years old, I wanted to be just like my maternal grandfather, a businessman. And but if he saw me today, probably first you'd say, "Holy crap, how did this guy get so fat?" But second, um, because my grandfather is the person that really introduced me to technology, science fiction. I remember him introducing me to Star Trek when I would used to go back to the apartment with him after we'd go to a Yankee game, and we'd watch old reruns of Star Trek. So he really sort of sparked my interest in technology and computers, and told me what all these companies like IBM were, and what he did in the war with computers, early computers. Um, I think the 10-year-old version of me would be amazed of the technology that I get to work with, that how the world has changed around me. But at the same time, if that 10-year-old had the ability to comprehend what has happened to our country from an economic perspective, just to, if he had known that, where he lived, 30, 40, 50% of the restaurants and stores were closed, and that it's kind of a bittersweet kind of a thing, because at 10 years old, it's hard to comprehend the world around you. And I guess, the 10-year-old Jason was very precocious and very introverted. I've become much more extroverted as I've gotten older. But I guess as a child, you don't have the same sense of appreciation for life and the world around you as you do when you're 42. But I'd hope he was proud of my accomplishments, at least.
No doubt, no doubt. Wow. So anything that you want to tell our viewers before we wrap this thing up? Any questions you want to ask, or basically take it from here if you have anything?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, I'd like everybody to thank all my readers, first of all, for reading Tech Broiler over, the last, I guess it's 4 or 5 years now, that I've been writing for ZDNet, and also for the other publications I've been writing for over the last 15 years. It's been a great ride, and I hope to see more of you. And if there's anything that you guys are interested in that I'm not covering, please feel free to click on the comment box, and shoot me an email.
Very cool. So what'd you think of this format? The Better Know a Blogger idea. How did it feel for you?
It's interesting, it puts you a little bit on the spot, and you have to think extemporaneously. But I think it was kind of interesting. It's like it was kind of like going to a shrink, but a lot less expensive.
Well, there you go. Our first episode of Better Know a Blogger with Jason Perlow of ZDNet's Tech Broiler. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we'll get to see and meet a bunch of other bloggers from both ZDNet and possibly other sites as well. I'm going to push the magic button over here, which will end the show, and have yourself a great day.